President Trump's travel ban officially went into effect just a few seconds ago. We'll get to that momentarily. But first, this morning, Washington melted down. You may have heard about it. Not because war broke out or the economy collapsed. Worse, the president tweeted something nasty about cable news hosts. In case you're returning from New Zealand tonight and missed it, here's what he wrote. Quote, "I heard poorly rated Morning Joe speaks badly of me. Don't watch anymore. Then how come low IQ crazy Mika, along with Psycho Joe, came to Mar-a-Lago 3 nights in a row around New Year's Eve and insisted on joining me? She was bleeding badly from a facelift. I said no." Well, that was it. Chaos erupted. Democrats in Congress rushed to the nearest microphone to express shock and horror and call for the president's resignation.
I think it's so blatantly sexist, I don't even know that there's a question about it. But sad to say, I am still the highest-ranking woman. I thought that was all going to be resolved in November. Instead, we have a person in the White House who not only doesn't happen to be a woman, but happens to disrespect women. That's too bad.
You spend your time in the morning dealing with attacking human beings that happen to be Americans and happen to be the media. Well, let me tell you something, Mr. President. I've gone through, as a member of the Judiciary Committee, impeachments, but we can't wait that long. It is time for you to resign.
Well, meanwhile, over at CNN, you would have thought a new ISIS torture tape had been released, except worse because it was Trump.
The man who, in his life and in the campaign, has acted like a misogynist, a sexist, a sexual predator. He is just not a decent human being.
This is objectively a statement from the highest office in the land, from the president, that objectifies women. This is a statement that is cruel. It attacks a woman's appearance.
This dude, this disgusting dude, is the president of the United States and says, listen, you crazy lunatic 70-year-old man, baby, stop it. You are now the president of the United States, the commander-in-chief, and you need to stop acting like a mean girl.
Got that? Because Trump attacked one woman, he attacked all women. He's a sexist because he's acting like, quote, a mean girl, which is suddenly a feminist thing to say, despite the fact it's an attack on girls. Okay, so what is this really about? Well, first, Trump is fighting back. The media suggests he's a mentally ill criminal. He calls them on their facelifts. He's a brawler. They're shocked by that, but they shouldn't be. There's something else going on, though. Trump doesn't play by the rules. He's a threat to the people who make and enforce the rules, in this case, the media establishment here in Washington. They hate him for that, and for good reason. They pretty much said so out loud today.
I can tell you, working overseas in war zones, you know, people are emboldened by the actions of this administration, emboldened by the all-out sort of declaration of war on the media.
There are people in the country who don't understand that this is a cynical reality TV game, and are going to hear over and over again from the president that the reporters, journalists, are enemies of the state. And someone, I mean, God forbid, but someone is going to do something violent against journalists in a large way, and then I know where the fault lies.
In other words, disagreement equals violence. If you criticize me, you're a physical threat. I feel unsafe. You must be silenced. First they came for Morning Joe. You've seen this gambit on college campuses for years. It's how liberals silence dissent, by conflating contrary opinions with violence. If it's strange to see middle-aged reporters in a studio in Washington fretting about their own safety, it shouldn't be. Passive aggression is the universal currency of the left. Nothing is more empowering than victimhood. It won't be long before NBC's entire White House unit claims affirmative action status. So the left's response to this is predictable and silly. No surprise there. But that is no defense of these tweets. They were stupid and they were counterproductive. They achieved no policy objective. They elevated a televised sideshow to cultural icon status. They brought joy to the left while embarrassing the president's supporters. They allowed liberals to crow about the degradation of the public square, even as they financed their campaigns with donations from Hollywood sleaze merchants. Let's be totally clear about this and not lie about it. The left doesn't hate Trump because he's vulgar, though he is. They applauded when Barack Obama vacationed with rappers. They think Lena Dunham is an artist. They hired Kathy Griffin. No, they hate Trump because he's a nationalist who says the interests of America and its people ought to come first, and that's fine. Let them hate him for that. The rest of the country loves it. That's the real tragedy of today's tweets. They were a diversion. When the president talks about the people who elected him, he wins. When he talks about himself, the left does. The president was not elected to pick fights with TV hosts. He was elected because he promised an agenda the country actually needs, but nobody else but him was offering. So in case he's watching tonight, here's a quick recap of what the campaign was about. Secure the border, keep America out of pointless wars, replace Obamacare with a system that expands affordable coverage for the middle class, bring jobs to the heartland, push back against the vultures on Wall Street. That's why people voted for Donald Trump. That's what he ought to do. If the press doesn't like it, ignore them. If members of his staff try to divert his energy to other agendas, fire them. Rarely has a president been elected with a clearer message, a clearer mission: restore the middle class. If he sticks to that, he will win. If he doesn't, he won't. Joining us now is former Speaker of the House Newt Gingrich, author of the New York Times #1 bestseller, Understanding Trump. Mr. Speaker, thanks for joining us.
Great to be here.
So I think you understand the president. I don't understand why he would get in the way of what is a successful and needed message, soft nationalism, soft populism, with a distraction like this.
He is an instinctive gut fighter. It bred into him probably by dealing with Page 6 in New York in the 1980s. It is so deep in his psyche that you hit him, he punches you. He doesn't think, would it be good to punch you? Would it be bad to punch you? He punches you. And look, I don't defend some of the stuff he does. I've told him to his face. I think that I love about 80% of his tweets. We negotiated, I got up to 90. But the last 10% is hopeless. And it's just who he is. It's, you know, in many ways, he's an extraordinary historic figure. In some ways, you wonder, why does he undercut himself? And maybe eventually he'll learn not to do it. But it's integral to his personality. You hit him, he's going to hit you back.
Is there someone in the White House who works for him, who has authority there, with a clear list of the objectives he articulated on the campaign? And by the way, the other night when he spoke in Iowa, keep the country out of pointless foreign wars, restore the middle class, jobs. Yeah. Do you think they're focused on those things?
Look, I think 98% of the time, President Trump gets focused. He wants to make America great again. It's not just a slogan. He wants to create jobs. He wants to reform regulations. He wants to fix the health system. He wants to fix the tax system. And then about 2% of the time, he goes back to being the Donald Trump who used to be, you know, a private businessman saying whatever he wanted to. And the 2% of the time, of course, in the media world, blows up and takes up almost half the space.
Right. No, there's no question about that. It is given disproportionate attention by people who are already opposed to his agenda and who also are shallow and in a lot of cases dumb. But people who aren't dumb and who have supported him and who I think hear kind of the policy dog whistle that he was emitting for the last few years are concerned about the number of Goldman Sachs people, for example, in the White House who don't seem to understand the agenda at all and maybe working at cross purposes against it. Do you think that's a fair concern?
Sure. Look, I think it's fair to say, like every White House, there's tension.
Yeah.
You know, in the Reagan White House, which is now romanticized, Jim Baker came from one direction, you know, Ed Meese came from another, Mike Deaver came from another, the National Security Council came from a fourth direction. Reagan presided over the whole thing. And Reagan, in the end, made the decisions. The same thing's happening here. They brought in a lot of really smart people from many different directions. I mean, people talk about Goldman Sachs, and they've had certainly a lot of alumni there. On the other hand, I mean, even Steve Bannon, ironically. So here's Bannon, who's the nationalist, but he's Goldman Sachs alumni.
That's true.
You know, it's partly a tribute to how good Goldman Sachs is. It's the Harvard of financial investing. On the other hand, in the end, it comes down to one person. And like Franklin Delano Roosevelt or Abraham Lincoln or Ronald Reagan, that one person has a pretty good sense of where he wants to go. And Trump routinely runs over everybody, routinely imposes his will, and gets them back on track, which is a very bold, very dramatic, and profoundly transformational direction.
That's reassuring from a man who understands Trump. Mr. Speaker, thank you.
Good to see you.
Well, journalists are saying tonight that Trump's rhetoric is placing them in physical danger. Time to give them special status, safe spaces. In the White House briefing room, Jeff Mason writes for Reuters, is the current president of the White House Correspondents Association. He joins us now. Jeff, I'm not making the case that journalists ought to like Trump. He's attacked them a lot. He doesn't like them and says so. But I wonder if you're a straight news journalist covering the news, why you'd insert yourself into the story. And that's what you see on a lot of the other channels. People who are just, non-opinion people talking about themselves and basically showing their cards, showing their animus toward the president. How's that helpful?
What examples are you thinking of?
Well, I mean, you saw it on the clip we just played from CNN, where one of their foreign correspondents said basically what Trump said today makes our job more dangerous, empowers ISIS. I mean, that's a ludicrous statement. There's no evidence to back that up. That's not reporting. That's emotion. And it discredits the person who said it.
But the president used an emotional tweet to criticize a working journalist. So I think that's probably what leads to...
Working journalist might be a little strong, but a TV host, sure, yeah.
She's a journalist.
Yeah, okay, fine.
Yeah, and I think that leads to putting journalism in the crux of the story. I think any good journalist would prefer not to be the center of the story. I certainly would prefer to be writing about the news, asking about the policy, writing about the substance of what a White House is doing. But the president creates news with his tweets, as you two were just discussing.
So, as I just said, the president doesn't like journalists, but straight journalists probably shouldn't say in public they don't like the president or give that impression, because that undercuts their role as an objective observer of the news. And yet no one seems to be reining them in. And I think it's doing damage to the perception that the press is objective.
You think it's doing damage when
reporters show how they really feel about a politician they're supposed to be covering objectively? And they are. And nobody is saying anything about it, and I wonder why.
Well, and you and I have talked about this before. I think it's important for consumers of news to know where they're getting their news. If you're watching an opinion show or a commentary show like yours, or watching a show that is a straight news show, if you're watching television, or if you're getting your news from a newspaper or a website or a news agency, I think that's very important. And I think if you are a reporter who works for a news organization that is, or a show or a newspaper, whatever, that is a straight news organization, absolutely. You should be neutral and you should report the news neutrally.
Do you think Trump's tweets this morning put foreign correspondents in danger abroad?
I don't know. I can't answer that. I think that the White House was asked about that. Sarah Sanders, I think, said that President Trump, of course, does not encourage violence. But I think that the world is watching. I think the world does watch and listen to the rhetoric that President Trump uses.
So do you think ISIS will now conclude, we kind of like journalists before, American English-speaking journalists, but now we don't because Trump doesn't like them?
I'm not qualified to speak as what ISIS is thinking about.
But would you agree that's one of the most ludicrous suggestions ever uttered on television?
I think I'm not going to take an opinion on that. I'm going to say I think people are listening to what the president says and what he writes and what he does. He has the biggest bully pulpit in the world, and that has an effect. Words matter.
So what does that mean exactly? It has an effect, words matter. You mean that journalists will be physically imperiled because Trump doesn't like them?
I can't answer that, Tucker. I don't know what the effect is going to be. What I'm saying is the president, when he criticizes journalists, others are watching and seeing that. Whether it's a foreign leader in China, whether it's a person in a country who doesn't believe in press freedoms, they look at the United States as an example on how press freedom works.
So last question.
They look and they see what the president does, and that has an impact.
It's debatable. We don't know whether it has an impact. We don't know whether the Chinese are saying, you know what, we're going to clamp down further. We're going to do another deal with Google to clamp down on press freedom because of what Trump said. Really quickly, do you think when the president says the press has personal animus toward me, they don't like me, and it makes me mad, do you think he has a point?
I think that any president probably is going to be unhappy with his coverage.
But do you think he's making a fair point? Do you think the press doesn't like him?
I think when he says he's unhappy with his coverage, that is a legitimate point to make. Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.